Welcome back to First Light, where we dive into stories of transformation, purpose, and the faith that carries us forward. I'm your host, Chris Keller. Today I'm joined by someone whose words and leadership have touched thousands, Pastor Melissa Pierce. She's the co-lead pastor of Generation Church in Jupiter, Florida, and the author of I Choose You, a powerful book of what it means to love with intention, consistency, and faith. Melissa's voice is a reminder that love is not just a feeling, it's a decision, a covenant, and a calling. All right, Melissa, I want to welcome you to First Light, and thank you for being here. I know recently the church had a series on I Choose You, and I went out and grabbed your book, and it's powerful. So I wanted to start with first, introduce yourself, but also talk about the heart behind I Choose You.
Yep. Well, Chris, thanks so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here. Love your podcast. Well, my name is Melissa Pierce, as you already said. I am married to Ben Pierce. We've been married now 24 years this year. We have two sons, and we lead Generation Church here in Jupiter, Florida. And about 5 or 6 years ago, God just put this stirring in my heart for marriages. I've had so many conversations, as you can imagine, leading a church for the past, 16 years. I've had so many conversations with people who their marriage was not what they expected, or they had expectations for their spouse that they have never communicated, and therefore they have this dissatisfaction inside of their marriage, and they really want to place the blame on the other person. So I had this idea for a book called I Choose You, or really a curriculum, a study called I Choose You because a thriving marriage is no accident. And the idea behind the book is not really about what your partner's going to do. It's more about what you're going to do and how you're going to change and how you're going to be the partner that your spouse always dreamed of having.
Yeah. So, I talked to you briefly, and, what was powerful for me is the series at church, I Choose You. But in my own life, I was struggling with, we've been married 17 years, 15 at the time that I kind of went through this transformation. And as I told you, I had to go to my wife and have a difficult conversation about how I never showed up as my best for her. And so it was a hard mission. But, really it was that moment of I choose you. So talk about, what the title I Choose You really means to you personally, and why you chose that title, and talked about it in the context of your marriage and obviously of your ministry. One thing I love about Generation Church and you and Pastor Ben is your vulnerability, that you guys share so much of your story. And I know that, I texted Pastor Ben after one of your sermons. I was like, man, that was fire today. She was on fire, and it was great. So if you can, talk about that.
Yeah, being married is hard, right? Being married is not, getting married is easy, having a wedding is easy, but being married and staying married is hard. It's hard work. It requires a lot of intentionality. And, I just remember very pivotal moments in our marriage where we were at some type of impasse, or we were trying to take some type of hill. We were trying to accomplish some type of goal. And I recognized that I was the problem. I was the block. And one example that I referenced specifically in the book was we wanted to build a home. Ben had always had a dream to build a home. His parents had built a home in Tennessee, where he's from. And one day we were, just like kind of working on the beginnings of that project. And as we were doing that, Ben was looking at all of my shopping purchases in our bank account, and he just said to himself, not to me, we're never going to be able to build this home. And it literally broke my heart. In that moment, I realized that I was really a barrier to one of his dreams, that I was the primary barrier to what we were trying to accomplish, what I said we were trying to accomplish. I thought we were trying to accomplish, but I really did not have the actions that were in alignment with the goals. And in that moment, I decided that I was going to change. And I went crazy. I went Dave Ramsey crazy. For any of your viewers who know who Dave Ramsey is, he's a personal finance really guru who has tons of resources on that. And I transformed really as a person because I for this person that I say that I love, that I'm in alignment with, that I'm trying to go on this journey with, if I'm not doing the things that actually support where I say we're going, then really I'm working against them. I'm working against us. And so I Choose You was really born out of some of my own hard moments where I had to take a look at myself and see where I needed to grow.
I think you talk about how love is more about choosing than a feeling.
Yes.
And so can you walk us through that, and, especially in our real life examples of, ordinary days and hard days alike, talk about about choosing versus just feeling.
Yes. So real love is when we make hard choices on bad days. We have to make the hard choices on the bad days. When the kids are going crazy, we have to make the hard choice to be calm and be that firm and kind, loving parent with our spouse. We have to make the hard choice on the bad days. And then when we do that, it actually helps create easier choices in the future. And so, the emotions of being in a relationship are there and should be there, right? But again, after you get married, a lot of that, dissipates, and what you have to it's no longer there by virtue of being there. It's there by intentionality. Feelings are there because you intentionally build opportunities for those feelings to grow. And so, but oftentimes I just find that love is an intellectual choice where I know that if I make this choice to yell, to be irritated, to be negative, to do something that is, harmful to our relationship, then that is an unloving choice. And no matter how much I say I love a person, if I'm not demonstrating it through my actions and through my choices, then I really have to question whether or not I actually do.
Yeah, I know a lot of things. What I've found, and one thing I talk about is being intentional.
Yeah.
And, for if you're training for, I always talk about it in the context of training, but I'm very intentional with my training. If I have to have a program, I'm very disciplined about it. I know what I have to do. And so I've taken that same to my relationship, and now I'm more intentional with how I approach my relationship. Can you talk about some of the practical tips that listeners can take away today about how to be intentional in their relationships?
Yeah, one of the things that I want to say to all the really intentional folks out there, your podcast is called First Light. So we're talking about people who are getting up at 4:30, 5 o'clock, who are really intentional about their routine. There is a difference between intentionality and rigidity, right? And you cannot being intentional does not mean being rigid. You have to have this flexibility inside of your intentionality. Otherwise, the people around you are going to resent your intentionality. And so you have to approach that systematic intentionality in a way that cares for the people around you, that cares for the people in your family, cares for your spouse, and really invites them in. Ben and I are very different. I am action first, you know what I mean? I really believe every problem can be solved with action. And Ben really takes his time. He's very thoughtful. He's very he's just very moderate in a lot of what he does, and it's amazing. I can bring a lot of speed and velocity, and he brings a lot of thoughtfulness and just slowing things down. And when we work together, we can get a lot done and make less mistakes. But when I'm only focused on my intentionality, my program, my way, and I don't bring my spouse into that, we don't share the intentionality around what we're doing and invite everyone's strengths. That's the key. That's the important part of it, is to invite everyone's strengths into the equation, into the conversation, into the decision. When we do that, we go further faster.
I laugh because it's very much the same in our relationship, and it's funny how kind of those opposites attract. Because I am that action first. We're planning a summer vacation. I'm like, just book it. We got it. Let's go.
Yeah.
And my wife's very thoughtful. Let's lead the reviews and let's plan the trip and what ride are we going to take. And I'm just like, oh, we'll figure it out. It'll be okay.
Yes.
So I laugh because I understand. But talking about being in a intentional relationship, you guys have planted this church and grown this church, and you did it beside each other. So talk about how ministry alongside your husband has kind of shaped your view on spirituality and partnership and marriage. And
Yeah. Yes. Well, being married is a full-time job in and of itself, right? So, like, if we're doing it right, we're thinking about our spouse. Like I said, we're bringing them into, all that we're doing, and we really have this shared vision for our life. It is unique when you work with your spouse, and Ben and I do work together, and whatever projects you're doing as a family, whatever you're doing as a family can be looked at through the lens of like a project or work, and I mean that in a good way. I don't mean that in a bad way. Because you could take the same strategic approach to it. You can still take a very strategic approach, but in a loving way. With your coworkers in your business, you or senior leaders that you're around, you value their strengths, right? You value who they are and what they bring to the table. And maybe you have conflict or what have you, but like when you work on a really strong team, like who the players are and like who's going to accomplish what. Ben and I are the same way. And not to make it sound like our relationship is like corporate and strategic, because it's not. We love each other. We are best friends. We have the best time. There's no one else on earth I would rather spend time with. And I understand how amazing he is. I understand the strengths that God has given him, and I step out of the way so that those strengths can shine. And the same, when Ben recognizes that, like, hey, you need to take this. This is your lane. He does the same thing, and we just have this way of allowing each other's gifts to blossom and to come forth, and really appreciate the unique way that God created each and every one of us. And I think that makes a really good marriage, because you get to be your spouse's number one cheerleader. You get to be the person that really calls out the gifts in them, because come on, let's be honest, if we're not our spouse's biggest cheerleader, someone's going to be. And even if that's social media, just giving them affirmation. And so, yeah, I just think it's leveraging each other's strengths in a super loving way that honors them and appreciates who they really are.
I want to talk more about the planting of the church, because you guys planted this church, and and now it's grown to something just amazing, a beautiful location, and working on a second location. Easter service was 4 services full. And so talk about the challenges of working with your spouse to build this amazing church. And I know it couldn't have always been easy. I know there was probably some challenges along the way, and how you guys kind of approach those challenges and how you work through those challenges.
Yeah. So when Ben and I started the church in 2008, we both had very successful careers. So I worked for a Fortune 1000 recruiting firm, and had, thank God, by God's grace, had experienced a lot of success in a leadership capacity there and a sales capacity there. And Ben was literally like the number one salesperson for his drug, I believe, in the country with Merck Pharmaceuticals. And so we had these very successful careers. We had no kids. We were traveling a lot, but God had put it in our heart to lay that down and to start this church. And so we began the process of starting the church. But for the first 3 years, we were bivocational. And so we continued to work. And so we were working 12, 14, 20 hours a day. On Saturdays, Ben would do the graphics. Like, he has some minor technical skills, and he was using some really old Adobe program back then. And he was doing all of everything. He would print these bulletins. He would write the sermons. It was crazy. And then the church began to grow. And then a few years later, we were both able to leave our corporate careers and start working full time at the church. And that was a challenge, because we were both in very high level leadership positions in our roles. So 2 very high level leaders came to start working together in this very new organization. We had hired some people, and so we had different ideas about how things were to go. And really, that was the place where I began to realize, like, when I do this and I run at that speed, I make mistakes. And when I stop and I let Ben, he takes that leadership role in this particular area, we make less mistakes. And then there are things where I'm strong. And so that is really where I learned, like, okay, we cannot approach this the way we've approached our corporate careers. We have to begin to work together and figure out who does what. And really our structure for the church is that Ben is the senior leader. He is the pastor. He is the one who leads the church, and I am there to support him. I don't know how much you know about the Enneagram, but I have a helper element in my personality, and so that helper element, I've really grown that, and I'm there to really support him in the vision of the church.
It's awesome. Another thing I want to talk about is the role of forgiveness.
Yeah.
I know you guys talked a lot about on stage and at church, but what role does forgiveness play in choosing each other?
Yeah. Forgiveness is huge. I think that as kids, a lot of times when we get into conflict, parents will be like, hey, you guys need to forgive each other. I even do that with my kids. But somewhere along the way, and maybe high school, and parents stop intervening in our conflicts, we've really sort of cast forgiveness aside and maybe have too much pride to engage in a conversation about forgiveness. But I think that forgiveness is the ultimate closure when we have conflict. I think it's very important that we have thorough forgiveness between us and our spouse. And so what that could look like is, you have a conflict, there's open negative feelings that we both feel, and the issue is unresolved. Even if we don't have an answer, even if we don't have the full path to resolve the issue, we can at least forgive one another for how we treated one another and for whatever our part was in the conflict. And what I really feel like it puts a important period on the end of that sentence so that we can move on to the next paragraph and we're not sort of stuck in this unresolved conflict. Obviously, the Bible has a lot to say about forgiveness. Jesus encourages us to forgive one another. Why? Because he forgave us, of every sin that we ever committed. Yeah.
Let's talk. Forgiveness is such a big deal in marriages because there's going to be hurt, and I always say, with my wife, and I said this to my firm the other day, is she's the closest person to me, right? So she sees me at my best and she sees me at my worst, and unfortunately, she has to deal with it all. So she has to forgive me almost daily. Last night I came home and said, we're not talking about work today. But talk about people who may be in having some challenges in their relationship now. Some of the things that they can do to work through it. I know, with the church, one of the big messages is, do life together.
Right.
We're not alone. And so the church has small groups.
Yep.
I know Ben was talking about, pastoral counseling, but there's also marriage counseling. So talk about kind of, some of the practical tools people can use to get through a marriage. I mean, for me right now, the one thing I've talked to my wife about is faith-based counseling. I'm all open to that right now. The traditional counseling for me, I just know I'm not ready for that. But like faith-based counseling, I'm all in. I'm hungry for it. I thirst for it. So talk about maybe the role of counseling and working through some of this and kind of giving people some practical steps that if they're in that tough spot, that season of their marriage where it's tough, some things that they can do to get through that.
Yeah. As we've sort of talked, about intentionality and that type of thing, I was just thinking about the word investment. Regardless of the stage that your marriage is in, if you have a great marriage, if you have an average marriage, or if your marriage is on the rocks and, people are considering divorce, no matter what phase you're in, your marriage requires investment to grow. And what happens with investments? Investments are things where we put a principal amount in and a compounded return, hopefully, comes from that, positive or negative. There is a compounded return. And And in your marriage, it is true. If you will invest the right things in your marriage consistently, daily, small things daily, big things medium things monthly, big things quarterly and annually. If you will invest in your marriage consistently, you will get compounded positive returns. Now, if you are married to someone who is not willing to engage or move past the point that you are, that's okay. You can continue to change. You can continue to grow, and you never know what's going to happen. But I would say that is the number one thing, because yes, there are groups and people definitely need community in their marriage. Yes, there is counseling, and that is an important way to invest in your marriage. But some of the simple ways that we can invest in our marriage daily is start every day with physical contact, with a hug. You know what I mean? Like, don't just let the kids take over and not be able to connect in the morning and just say, good morning. How did you sleep? That's what we do. How did you sleep? How are you doing? Are you okay? What's your day like? Have a little bit of connection every single day. And then if you want to learn more about your marriage, read books about marriage. There are tons of faith-based marriage books, tons of faith-based marriage podcasts where you can just be pouring in and investing in yourself so that you can invest in your marriage. Additionally, like you said, there are marriage small groups. There's an I Choose You small group at Generation Church where people can attend that and learn more about how to choose their spouse in a greater way. And definitely, I am a huge believer in faith-based marriage counseling. I have done it. Ben and I have a counselor that we go to on a consistent basis. Not so much, it's seasonal. But, throughout the years, we have consistently sought counsel when we have an issue that we can't seem to, fully work through, or we think that there are some areas where we may need some extra help.
One of the things you just talked about, and you guys talked about it on stage, and I use it in business, and so why don't I use it with my wife? But it's kind of like what we call in business skip level meetings, And so what you guys talked about on stage was, the check-ins.
Yeah.
How can I, asking those questions about what can I do to support you?
Yeah.
If there was one thing I could do today that would alleviate your stress. Talk about the importance of those check-ins, because I thought that was, to me, I was taking pictures of the screen and writing it down like that. To me, this was amazing. Why do I take that same intentionality to work, but then I don't take that same intentionality to my marriage?
Absolutely. Everybody wants to be seen and heard, right? Everybody does. It doesn't matter. Your kids want to be seen and heard. And for some reason, we tend to put our families into this category where they're good. They're good. They know they're good. I got to go over here and be really intentional and professional and all the things and create a lot of success over here, but they're good. But the truth is that everybody wants to be seen and heard, and being seen and heard helps us flourish as people. And so when you take the time to be intentional, which, by the way, time is the most precious resource. And so when we take the most precious resource and we invest it in the most precious people to us on planet Earth, then we do see those compounded effects that I talked about earlier. But it's just making them feel seen, and it's making them feel heard. And it's really, I think, an even more powerful step on top of that is when you ask the question, not just listening, not just actively listening, but really seeking to understand what they're saying. Because often people will say something and we'll hear it. It will land on us differently than they mean it. And so asking some clarifying questions, asking some, questions to make sure we really understand, and then hopefully we're creating some type of action plan to act on what they said, and to, really serve them in a way that they need.
I know those questions were important. I actually had a friend that was kind of going through some things, and I said, "Hey, maybe you're spending your time doing the wrong thing."
Yeah.
Right. Maybe that she doesn't want you to do that. Why don't you ask her what she really needs or what she really wants?
Yes.
And when he asked the question, it made all the difference in their in the relationship. So it's amazing what just asking the question can do. I can't not talk about having kids. So, talk about how parenting has changed your all's marriage. I know your kids are younger now, or now they're getting a little bit bigger.
Yep.
But talk about the impact of children on relationships, because it's such an important thing, especially when they're at the age that we have.
I think I think Ben and I have a really unique situation because it took us a while to have kids. We were married for like 17 years before we had our first one. So we had this whole life of knowing what it is like to have a lot of time, to have a lot of freedom, a lot of ability to do all kinds of things, travel, and, really just sort of within the context of your marriage, and God's will, do whatever you want. And then kids came along, and they are precious gifts from God that we prayed for a very long time. But man, do they impact your day to day, and they impact everything. And I would just say that obviously the impact is real. We know. I mean, it is crazy town at times. It was crazy town this morning before I came here. But I think the way you get through it is you really have to choose to be that sense of guidance in the home. You know what I mean? Like, you cannot get frustrated when they get frustrated. You cannot, and I do. I'm not saying I don't. I'm working on it. But you really have to shape the culture of your home. And sometimes we can think about that as intentional first light people. We can think about the idea that we're going to shape the culture of our home. And then, like, on day 2, when everything goes crazy, we're like, this isn't working. I'm not doing this anymore. This is ridiculous. And you sort of just go back to some of your old patterns. But culture is shaped day by day. And just like we can build a culture in our business, we can build a culture in our home, and it comes through choices. And we have to remember, we're the leader. God gave us the ability to be the leader. And there are times where, as the leader, we're going to have to lay things down that we want to do, ambitions, desires, hills that we want to take. Sometimes it's not good for the family, and we're just going to have to lay it down at that time and pray and hope that maybe there's another time for that. And so that can be hard too. That's something I think people don't talk about as much, where it's not that children are hindering you from anything. They are a blessing. They are part of God's intention and design. They are the thing, at certain times in your life. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, and that's helpful.
Well, you talked about during the series that the message wasn't just for married couples. It was also for people who maybe weren't yet to be married. So talk about how I Choose You is important in the context of someone who is, single and looking for a relationship and looking for that partner.
Yep. I honestly think that it's almost more important for someone who's single. If someone who's single got a hold of this at this stage of their life, it's going to help them in 2 ways. Number one, it's going to help them by becoming the person that they want to be as a spouse. So they're going to make changes and make choices that are going to make them an excellent spouse. The second unintended benefit, but sort of side benefit of it, is it's going to shape their values. It's going to shape their standards, and they're not going to accept less than their standards because they've worked on themselves. They know who they're looking for. They know who they're going to be and how they're going to show up in their marriage. And so because of that, I think that the bar is going to be higher for the person that they attract because they're going out there looking for a relationship with standards and values that most people don't have.
One thing I want you to talk about as well is I know you are an early morning riser. You spend that time in prayer and reading your Bible. I know Pastor Ben talks about that a lot. And so talk about, the context of choosing God every day. I Choose You. It can also go to choosing faith. So talk about how you approach your relationship with God and how you choose God every day first.
Yeah. With kids, you have to do a lot between like 4 and 7 because it's quiet and sometimes it's the only quiet time you get in like a 12-hour period of the day, and any time alone. And the Bible says in John chapter 15 that when we abide in Him and He in us, we bear much fruit. And there's a lot of us out there who are trying to produce a lot of fruit, who are trying to produce a lot of results. But I've found that the best results that I produce start by abiding in him. And every single morning, those hours that I get, or that time that I get, this morning it wasn't that much. I got up at like 5, and my oldest one was in my space with me at 5:20, and so I let him hang out with me for a while, and I tell him the things that I'm reading and the things that I'm praying about, and because I want to expose him to it. At first it was really hard. I was like, look, this is my time. You're gonna have to move on, go back to your room. But now I take some of that time to model for him what I'm doing, and it is making a huge difference in him. And he'll say things like, oh, I read my Bible today. He can't fully read yet, but he's like, but that he's saying it, I think is amazing. And so now I see that time as with God and shared with my kids. But it's precious time, and it's so valuable. I get so much clarity. I get so much direction. I get so much peace that I don't get if I just wake up, start my day, work through my plan for the day, and move on. So it's highly valuable.
For anyone that's listening, or and the couples out there, what's one habit that every couple should do starting right now, starting today?
One habit that every couple should do starting today. Well, can I give you two?
Sure,
I have two. One is, like I said, that morning check-in is how are you? How did you sleep? Are you good? Hug, connect, physical embrace. The second one, and this is more annual, which is why I wanted to tag it on, is I think every couple should sit down annually and work through what they want the year to look like. And the categories that people will include will be different based on their relationship, but it could be your finances, how you want to parent your kids, what books you want to read, the fitness journey, what races are we doing this year, what vacations are we taking, because that creates a level of unity. The daily check-in is the micro unity, but the annual check-in is really the macro unity for the year. We know what's going to happen this year. We know what life is going to look like. And you don't have to make every single decision, but you definitely have this unified approach to the upcoming year. And so I would plan for that. You don't need a new year to do it. You could do it right now for the remainder of 25, or from 25 to 26, and so you don't need January to come around. You could start it today.
Well, my wife asked me that. She's like, you have all these meetings at work, all these planning meetings and all these weekly meetings, and she said, why don't we do that at home?
Yeah.
Why don't we sit down as a family and plan our week? Why don't we sit, and why don't we sit down as a family and plan what our quarter looks like? Why we don't sit down as a family and plan our year? And I know you guys spoke about that in the I Choose You series, but it was like, why don't I do that?
Yeah.
Why don't I take that intentional approach with my family as well? And so that's one thing that we took away from the I Choose You series at church. Talk about the roadmap that you got in I Choose You, and then kind of what's next. What's your plan on after I Choose You for anyone that's listening?
Yeah, I Choose You is it's been really neat to see a project that you worked on for a couple of years live on and really have some resonance beyond maybe the first or second year that you wrote it. And so it's been very cool to see married couples really embracing it in this last series that we did, the groups growing. I'm thinking about working on possibly doing a course, an I Choose You course that maybe there are people out there. So I have this sense that there are people out there who they won't ask for help, but they will buy help. They will purchase help, and not for a tremendous amount, but they won't ask for it, but they'll purchase it in the form of a course. And so I'm hopeful that I could maybe reach the person who's maybe not in the place where they're going to a church. Maybe they're not in a place where they're going to go to a small group, but they do have some foundation of faith, and a Christian-based marriage course would be helpful for them. So I'm praying about that. I'm thinking about that. I'm still kind of working on that, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Last piece of advice that you'd give to anyone kind of struggling in life, and whether they're married, not married, single, and just in, what's the one piece of advice that you give people to kind of help them if they're in a challenging situation about how to get through?
Yeah. For me, the only thing I can share is from my experience is that the scripture tells us that apart from God, we can do nothing. And that is your first step. And if you are in a relationship with Him, then seek His direction. The Bible says in Psalm 23 that the Lord is our shepherd, and that means He's the directional leader of our life. And so seeking that direction from the Good Shepherd is the best first step that anyone can take.
Absolutely. Well, I thank you so much for being here today to talk about relationships. I know that my wife and I have taken so much away from being at Generation Church, from the I Choose You series, from the I Choose You book. And so thank you so much for spending your time and giving us some wisdom today.
Thank you, Chris.
Melissa, thank you so much for sharing your heart and wisdom today. I Choose You is more than a book. It's a roadmap to loving well and staying rooted in purpose, even when life pulls us in different directions. If you're listening and felt a spark today, whether you're in a thriving relationship or walking through one that needs healing, go grab a copy of I Choose You. And if you're local to Jupiter, Florida, be sure to check out Generation Church and hear Melissa preach in person. Until next time, keep shining your light.